Fight fans worldwide, whoever you are and wherever you are, thanks for watching. My name is HB, alongside my brother in boxing, Breezy, and this is The Hard-Hitting Truth. This is a podcast by boxers to give you an unbiased look at the sweet science we love so much. Joining us on this episode is one of our usual suspects, Adonis, a young sports broadcaster in the making, and at this stage of the game, we have to talk about Jake Paul. But before we go any further, please, if you haven't already, subscribe to us on YouTube. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram at thhht.boxing. Also, while you're listening, go ahead and give us a thumbs up. Leave some feedback for us in the comments. Most importantly, share this content. Tell your friends to tell their friends about the hard-hitting truth. Breezy.
Yes, sir.
Are you ready for this one?
Always ready, my brother.
All right. Go ahead and ring that opening bell.
Ding, ding.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, the date is currently December 21st, and that means you already know what happened. On December 18th, Jake Paul scored another viral knockout of another opponent. This time it was Tyron Woodley, former UFC champion, and he did so in devastating fashion. And you know what? Honestly, it was a fight that, for the most part, people got their money's worth. If you love Jake Paul, you got to see him score a beautiful knockout. There's really no other way to put it. Just an excellent knockout as far as knockouts are concerned. And if you hate Jake Paul, you got to see him bleed. Jake Paul got through this fight with a little adversity. He got cut by an elbow, like a glancing elbow blow. Midway through where the fight ended in the 6th round after after Jake Paul scored a huge overhand right on Tyron Woodley towards the end of the 6th round. Canceled Christmas from that point forward. But I want to say he got elbowed. Jake Paul got an elbow to the forehead maybe around the 3rd round or so. Fought through it. At that point in the fight, I'm not sure. I wasn't so sure that he'd be able to get through the fight, but not only did he get through the fight, which was only an 8-round fight, scored the knockout that he was promising people since the weigh-in, and he did it in devastating fashion. Adonis, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you first because you are the youngest one on this panel. When I say he's a young sports broadcaster in the making, 1, it's because he knows sports that well. 2, it's because he is the youngest out of the 3 of us here tonight. And I want to bring you in first because out of the 3 of us here, you're probably the biggest UFC fan between us. So tell me what you thought about Jake Paul's knockout victory over Tyron Woodley.
It was impressive, to say the least. There's certain things, it's not like he's out here knocking out guys that a lot of the boxing community might be overly familiar with. But Tyron Woodley wasn't no slouch. He's older now, MMA fighter, was never the best boxer, even in MMA. But nevertheless, he took Jake Paul to a split decision last time. And he got knocked out the 2nd time. So anytime you can show that level of improvement from performance to performance, you're doing something right. The fight wasn't the greatest up until that point. It was somewhat entertaining, but if you're really used to watching the finer points of boxing, I could see how you didn't love that fight up until that point. And to be honest with you, that knockout, it not only saved a lot of the perspective or perception of Jake Paul, but it also earned him a little bit more. Because beforehand, he's been knocking out guys, wrestlers, other YouTube stars, basketball players, guys who we didn't really see or have that level of respect for. But Tyron Woodley, man, even though it was MMA, he was still a world champion of a combat sport. So anytime you can see a guy who's been taking boxing, seriously, but not have been doing it for that long, you're always going to be impressed when you can get a performance like that against a guy who is pretty well respected amongst a lot of the wider combat sports community. So it is what it is. But at the end of the day, for what it was, I'm going to give Jake Paul a pretty good rating on that.
Yeah. Honestly, When I heard Tyron Woodley was getting the rematch after Tommy Fury pulled out of this fight because of a rib injury, according to the reports, um, I was thinking that maybe Jake Paul kind of made a mistake, giving somebody like Tyron Woodley, who has a lot of professional fighting experience, not necessarily boxing, but he's in the UFC. It's a combat sport. It's all fighting. And UFC fighters, MMA fighters, I should say, they practice different disciplines: boxing, Muay Thai, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, judo, a host of things. So, they're no strangers to boxing or, other disciplines. So for him getting in the ring boxing Jake Paul again, I thought it would be a mistake on Jake Paul's end because he has, more of a fighter's pedigree than Jake Paul does, coming from, you know, his YouTube background. But that's not the way it went. Uh, if you would have told me that Jake Paul was going to bring Tyron Woodley into deep waters and drown him, there's no I'd have been
Yeah.
like, yeah, I'll take that bet. But that's what happened. So, Breezy,
Yeah.
I gotta ask you, is Jake Paul good for boxing or is he bad for boxing? What do you think? Is Jake Paul good for boxing? Let me know what you think, champ.
Well, there's kind of, to me, that's kind of like two questions. Like there's boxing as like the business and what goes on behind the scenes and ratings and numbers and all that. I really don't think he affects the business of boxing too much. If anything, it's good because he does pretty good numbers, and you could see some more like some female fights or whatever fights on the undercard. So anything that could put more eyes on those boxers too, I view as something positive. So I think either there's no effect or there's a positive effect on the business side. But then there's the boxing, the sport, actually, for the real boxing fans, the purists. I think he's good. I think he's good for it because out of everybody he's fought, um, nobody's been actually training specifically for boxing longer than he has. So he's, out of everybody he's facing, he's the most experienced boxer. And I said it before, and I probably don't say it enough, but the science works, and he's proof of that. I know he ain't at no high level or anything like that, but he's more experienced in boxing than anybody he's faced, and that's what happened. He's knocked everybody out except for the first fight with Woodley. So that's one in favor of boxing, if you ask me. And I know Woodley has a lot more, MMA experience, fighting experience, but this is why, I got boxing on the top of the hierarchy in combat sports, because you can't fake it. You can't, you know what I'm saying? It helps maybe to have been in other combat sports, but it could be a disadvantage because my Spanish teacher in high school, she told me like a baby that knows no language could learn a language faster than an adult that learns a language that already speaks can learn like a new language. Because if you say something to them in the language they're trying to learn, they think in the language they think in and then translate it. A baby is just straight what he knows. Jake Paul just came in. He doesn't know fighting. He doesn't know grappling. He doesn't know any of that stuff. He just knows boxing. Woodley, it seemed like he's still thinking with an MMA mind. He's boxing. This is
Yeah.
not his first boxing match, but I think he's, his reactions and reflexes are more for MMA than boxing. 'Cause I didn't want to go in on too much, but a savvy boxer wouldn't have got hit with that shot that put him to sleep. It was kind of, he loaded up and he saw it coming. I ain't saying he saw it coming, but I expect a savvy boxer would have seen it coming in, like, done something about it. But I'm boxing over MMA. Anytime there's a UFC, MMA, anything versus boxing, I'm always for the boxer. And like I think I said this before, but it's about time we start considering him a boxer. Jake Paul. I mean, he's been putting in the work for years, you know, at this point. I'm not saying he's a high level boxer, but you know, he's doing numbers. We got to talk about him. He's doing his thing. I mean, he's not making huge waves in the sport like from a boxing, you know, fan stance, but he's relevant right now. So
Yeah, you know, I want to say just recently, Shannon Sharp on FS1 Undisputed said that Jake Paul is more of a novelty than a boxer, and I can agree with that. You know, and he
Mhm.
kind of compared him to Butterbean, and you know, Butterbean was, you know, technically a boxer, but you know, can you name any opponents, Breezy? I know I can't. You know what I mean?
I,
I know he fought, and I know you know, I know he was a celebrity and everything, but I
mhm.
don't know who he fought. I don't believe he ever fought for a world title, and that could be Jake Paul. He could be the new age, you know, Butterbean, and just a lot more popular, and obviously in much better shape, but with similar knockout power. There's one thing that we can't deny about Jake Paul, and it's the fact that he's got knockout power. I mean, if you you know, in boxing, they say that, and I'll have to, you know, based on what you said about, you know, the way he knocked out Tyron Woodley, you're saying that a boxer, most refined boxers wouldn't get caught with a shot like that. You know, they usually say, I should say, in boxing, it's low key disrespectful to throw that straight right at somebody without setting it up. This wasn't even a straight right. It was a or a lead straight right, I should say. It was a lead overhand right, and he clocked Tyron Woodley. And he, you know, all he did was just do just a little foot feint. You know, he stepped in, stepped back out, and then when he stepped in again, he just unloaded a huge overhand right. And you know, in the words of Snoop Dogg from the Jake Paul versus Nate Robinson broadcast, "Good night, Irene." Um, Adonis, what do you think? Is Jake Paul good for boxing or not so much?
You know, always from a business perspective, anytime you get a big draw where you can get a ton of pay-per-views, it's always going to be good from that perspective. Um, kind of like Breezy was saying earlier, a lot of these guys that he's been fighting don't have exactly the same amount of boxing pedigree as he does just purely boxing. Um, MMA and boxing are so different in so many different ways. And I know, hey, we're a boxing channel. I love it. But boxing is going to always be superior for boxing, you know? Uh, and, you know, MMA is going to be superior for MMA, and wrestling is probably going to be superior for wrestling. So in this context, Jake Paul is going to have the advantage over anybody who has not been training the same amount of time he has been. And I think it really does show that, I mean, like Reezy said, it works. It works. A guy like this can put in the time, put in the work, and honestly, he's not any sort of amazing boxer. But one, he brings new eyes to the sport. Gives shine to people like Amanda Serrano, who now, honestly, like the Katie Taylor fight. I know for people that really keep up with women's boxing, that didn't seem so as appealing as it does right now because Amanda Serrano is a way bigger star than she was just 12 months ago, and a lot of that's due to Jake Paul, who is her promoter at this point. Um, so
Yeah.
you can really see where just that in itself, one of the biggest women's fights probably of all time, is going to go down. And a lot of it's due to Jake Paul helping out. So from that perspective, he helps out too. I don't think it's bad for boxing by any means. There's a lot of people out there, especially, I don't want to hate on them, but a lot of old heads who don't really love the way that Jake Paul goes about his business. And that's fine. You don't have to love it. But I think it's going to be really naive to say that he doesn't bring anything to the table. Because clearly, I mean, how many people have you seen talking about boxing just this year alone? You know what I mean? You don't get this kind of, you get this buzz for people like Canelo, people like Gervonta Davis, and people like Jake Paul. And that's about it. That's about it. So you can kind of see where this is good just for the name of the sport being out there in general.
Yeah, that's true. And you know what, Adonis, when you said old heads, I feel like I got one more gray hair to pop up in this beard, you know, talking about the old heads.
Not bad.
You know,
See
it
something.
happens. It's a, you know, it happens. So what do I think? Is Jake Paul good for boxing? I'd have to agree that he is good for boxing. Just like you guys were saying, if you just talk about what he's done for Amanda Serrano, one of the things that I think the UFC does a great job of, and DAZN, they do a great job also, is broadcasting a lot of uh, the women's fights on major cards. The zone will have women headline cards, and there'll be male boxers and female boxers, or they'll have some male champion headline a card, and there'll be male boxers and female boxers. And you don't see that a lot in boxing, and I wish we did, just because we need more inclusion in the sport. Whenever there's a big fight, you should see some of the best female competitors out there, and some of the best male competitors out there, and show more of the card instead of just showing you know 3 fights for a pay-per-view. I would like for them to show more of the card and show fighters on both sides of the aisle, whether it's male boxers or female boxers. And Jake Paul, his last 2 pay-per-view events, he's had Amanda Serrano as his co-main event, and it's got her a lot of exposure. So when you think about just that, he's good for boxing. When you think about the level of exposure he brings to boxing, all the young fans that, admire him and are going to support him in whatever endeavors he decides to jump into, that's more viewership for boxing. And, whether it's good or bad is, we'll find out later down the road, but in the short term, it's good for boxing. I think Jake Paul is bad for boxing, and I wouldn't even say bad for boxing. I'd say he's bad for himself. Especially when he compares himself to Muhammad Ali and just things like that. He's like the ultimate troll who could actually fight. So you know it, it's like, and I guess in that sense, I mean, he's not so much of a troll because he can fight, because there are a lot of trolls out there that
Mhm.
just troll and can't throw hands at all. So I got to give Jake Paul his credit. He says a lot of ridiculous things, but he's been backing up some of it with fantastic knockouts. If we look at this graphic right here, this is another reason that he's kind of ridiculous. He goes on and he tweets after his fight and says that I hope you're training, Canelo, and it's like, you don't belong in the same sentence as Canelo Alvarez, man. And you don't, but he just does it just to troll. And he's bad. It's bad energy just because he puts that out there, and then you just see his trolls going to work and just putting out just the most ridiculous statements out there after Jake Paul says something like that. So I think he's good for boxing, and he's kind of just bad for his own reputation, just because, you know, most hardcore boxing fans won't take him serious based off of the things that he says. I'm one of those people. I don't think he, like, do I ever think that he'll fight for a world championship at cruiserweight? No. Could I be wrong? Absolutely, because we see at this point, at least, he's taking his training serious enough to the point where the only thing Jake Paul is bad for is the UFC. Man, Tyron Woodley, and correct me if I'm wrong, Adonis, UFC champion and 4 successful title defenses. Am I right?
Yeah, that sounds about right. He's widely regarded as maybe the second best welterweight second to third, depending on who you're talking to, best welterweight to ever do it in the sport. So when you're looking at that, I would like to just interject though, that the fact that these MMA guys, they're doing it because 1, it's a good payday, but 2,
Very good payday.
they're kind of like, you got to give them props for being willing, especially at 40 years old, to try to switch over and do something else. You know what I mean? Because you don't see, and that's why we gave so much credit to Clarissa Shields, right? Because she was willing to switch over, and we kind of saw how that went too. Like, if there's certain people are great at certain things, and it doesn't exactly translate across sports. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So when you look at the case by case thing, it's not great for the UFC, but it's also the reality of the fact that Tyron Woodley is a 40-year-old man on about a 6-fight losing streak right now, both in
Yeah,
MMA and in boxing. So
that's true. But the thing about it, Adonis, is I don't see any memes about Clarissa Shields like we're seeing about Ben Askren and now Tyron Woodley. I mean, it's just embarrassing to a certain degree for this to be happening more than once to these UFC fighters. Breezy, what do you think?
Yeah, it's pretty embarrassing. You know, as somebody that was, boxing, and I've been in a lot of gyms, a lot of sparring. I've I've sparred with a lot of UFC guys, a lot of MMA guys, and I I'm not trying to put anybody down, but it's always easy work. You know what I'm saying? You guys don't know me as a boxer. I'm not no best in the world guy or nothing like that, but it's just always easy work when they come over to when they work on their stand-up game with a real boxer. I just say that. So I do give them credit, if it makes, like I always say, if it makes dollars, it makes sense. So I'm not mad at it. Do whatever works. People tune in, give them what they want to see, and boxers and UFC guys and UFC have been doing that. Every time it's a crossover event, it's a successful event. So
Yeah.
I'm
And,
not mad at that.
and Breezy, I'm no stranger to it either. There are a lot of gyms that have boxing rings and octagons in the same location. So MMA fighters mix it up with boxers all the time. And that's kind of why I say it's embarrassing for
Yeah.
someone like, someone of Tyron Woodley's stature to lose in the fashion that he lost to Jake Paul, who most hardcore boxing fans don't consider a real boxer. Um, you know, MMA fighters are just no stranger to boxing, to the training, to
Yeah.
sparring with boxers, and it's just so unfortunate to see some of them going out like this. And it is a really it's an entirely different conversation, but you know, at a certain point, it's like what gives, I just don't. Nobody would have seen this coming, this big of a knockout, especially after the first fight went the distance. So, part of me wants to say, like, maybe it's because Tyron got this fight on short notice, but, nobody else is really saying that. So I'm not going to say it either. It's just, like I said,
And
Dana
also,
White,
if
Dana,
I
you got to do something, man. You got to put Jake Paul on your hit list or something. You got to do something because
you got to stop this guy.
you got to stop this guy. This should be all points bulletin at the UFC headquarters should be Jake Paul in the middle of a bulletin board, and they should just be throwing darts at it. Just figuring out a way to take this guy down. I don't know.
I will say there are certain guys like nobody really talked about it, but when Anderson Silva upset Chavez earlier this year, Chavez isn't his prime at all, but neither is Anderson Silva. Not a ton of people would have really Anderson Silva was sent down there to be a big name that kind of got fed to a Chavez who was trying to get out of the sport, and he ended up winning. There are certain times that this doesn't exactly pan out the way Jake Paul is going to want it to, and he's picking his fights really smart. I mean, heck, he's 5-0. What 5-0 boxer doesn't pick their fights really smartly? Especially when they're a big name the way he is. But there are certain guys outside of the Ben Askrens, Tyron Woodleys, guys who are known as wrestlers that aren't even pure boxers that could give Jake Paul a lot of problems in the future.
Yeah. The number one person that comes to my mind is Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz is known in the Bay for sparring with a lot of notable boxers and having great boxing talent. It's kind of why him and Conor McGregor were such a good matchup, especially when they were standing up. Um, Aside from him, like you said, there's Anderson Silva. Uh, I really think that Nate Diaz might be the best option because he's a little bit younger than Anderson Silva. Jake Paul, it looks like he's already going after Masvidal. He just said on the Impulsive podcast, I want to say today, that he's offering Jorge Masvidal $5 million and a portion of the pay-per-view proceeds to hop in the ring with him next. Jorge Masvidal, prior to that, was saying that Jake Paul should sign a one-fight deal with the UFC and hop in the octagon. What do you guys think is next for Jake Paul? And I'll turn it over to Adonis first.
Yeah, so just a little bit of inside baseball here. The UFC contracts they're very, very limiting to what UFC fighters can do. Dana White, like we saw Conor McGregor, Floyd Mayweather, but that was the exception, the one exception in a promotion that's been going on since the 90s,
Yeah.
for for the biggest fight, bar none, any sport that there had ever been, So that's kind of where you have to be to for the UFC to let you go out of your contract in box. So I don't think Nate Diaz, I don't think Jorge Masvidal, I don't think we're going to see any of these guys next, because honestly, the UFC probably doesn't. One, they don't want to give Jake Paul the shine, and two, it's just not going to be lucrative enough overall for them to justify it. I think probably Anderson Silva is going to be next for Jake Paul or Tommy Fury. Those are the two that really stand out to me. One, because there's not as much size parity. You got to think Jake Paul's fighting at 190 something pounds. Nate Diaz fights at 155 pounds in the UFC. Jorge Masvidal is a 170 in the UFC. Tyron Woodley was a 170 in the UFC. I would like to see somebody with similar physical characteristics who can actually kind of box a little bit. I don't think Tommy Fury or Anderson Silva are all that great of boxers, so it could be an interesting matchup that way. And I think that would probably be the route that's going to be easiest to go down for Jake Paul.
Okay. Very, very good points. Breezy, what about you? What do you think Jake Paul should do next?
What I think he should do, obviously fight somebody with a little bit more experience. I don't know really what's most likely next for him, but I would just like to see him fight anybody that's been boxing before Jake Paul was a thing in boxing. That'd be interesting to me. Other than that, I'm not going to name any boxer that I can name, because I feel like I know what happens in that fight. If he fights somebody that the average person can name, they're probably levels above that, but Anderson Silva makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't be mad at that, I mean, I tune in.
I'll tell you what I don't want to see. And it's purely based on the mid work that they usually post. And it's hip hop artists. Don't do it. Do not call out Jake Paul. We watch your workout videos. I'm not going to say any names out there for any other rappers, but I'm talking about big time rappers. We see your mid work. Don't do it. Don't do it. That's not what we want to see.
Yeah.
Being that this is, a show that's based in Chicago, Kendall Gill is somebody that has trained in boxing for a long time and has called out Jake Paul for quite some time. That'd be an interesting fight to see. I would definitely back Kendall Gill in that fight. And, this is for those of you that know the story or don't know the story, it's definitely Googleable. The Jussie Smollett case, everybody has probably heard of it by now. Here's what you may not know, and it's something that I saw with my own two eyes. The brothers from the Nigerian brothers that were involved in the Jussie Smollett case, one of them or both of them, but certainly at least one of them can box. And I saw it, at the Golden Gloves. One of them is a Golden Glove, won a championship. One of them is a Golden Glove champion. And I want to say scored the knockout of the night when I was in the building. I was supporting a friend, getting ready to leave. Shout out to my guy Jordan, aka Chucky, Jordan Jackson, Golden Gloves champion. I was there supporting him that night, checking out his fight. He won, I believe, at 165. And as I was getting ready to leave, all I hear is boom. And it was the sound of somebody hitting the canvas. So I turn around and look, and somebody's on the floor. I want to say face down. And I just see this brother in the corner with his arms, his elbows up on the ropes like this, just waiting for the guy to get up, like a stone cold killer. And the guy gets up, and the fight lasted maybe about 12 more seconds after that. He went over there, dropped him again. And I don't even know the guy's name, but I know for a fact it was one of the brothers involved in the Jussie Smollett case. Dropped this dude. Knockout of the night, I believe, if my memory serves me correctly. And I know it was one of the brothers from the Jussie Smollett case, because after I saw that, I left the arena, Cicero Stadium, and all you see is WGN, Fox News, CBS, NBC fans, all outside the arena. And I said, well, I went over, I said, well, how come you guys are all here? This is pretty atypical. I come to the Gloves a lot, and I don't see this much news coverage. They're like, yeah, one of the guys from the Jussie Smollett case is fighting. And then somebody that was with me was like, that was him that knocked out the guy that we just watched. I said, what? So it may sound crazy to people out there, but that could do numbers. It really could do numbers. And I'm rolling with the Nigerian guy. He could box. It's just a matter of that would be an even fight, and it's just a matter of who wants it more. And again, it could do crazy numbers. I'm sure the Jussie Smollett case is just as viral as one of Jake Paul's knockouts. So that's something that could be next. I think if Dana White wants to save face, he would either not let his fighters fight Jake Paul anymore, and that's current or former UFC fighters. I would just Dana, have a meeting, please. Bring people into the conference room, get in the war room and talk strategy. And if any of these guys go in there against Jake Paul in the future, you guys should make it a team effort to make sure that they come out victorious, or at least save face for the brand. In the last fight, Tyron Woodley at least saved face because he lost a decision, and it was arguable whether it should have went Jake Paul's way or just be a draw or what. But this result, this 6-round knockout, is something that it's just going to be. It's Tyron Woodley will never live it down. I shouldn't say never, but it's going to be very hard for him to live it down. And it'll also be difficult for the UFC as a brand to live it down. At the end of the day, Jake Paul inspires me to look UFC fans dead in their face at a sports bar and just say, don't say another bad word about boxing ever again until you take care of the Jake Paul problem. Period. I don't want to hear it. UFC fans, if you are listening, I don't care. You can troll me in the comments. I do not want to hear it at Twin Peaks, Dave and Buster's, wherever fights are being watched. I do not want to hear how much better the UFC is than boxing. I don't want to hear how so-and-so would do this to so-and-so. I do not want to hear it ever again. Probably not ever again in my lifetime after this past weekend. Breezy, anything you want to add?
To be honest, like you said, if I was Dana White, I'd just keep my guys away from him, because I don't see them producing anybody that's going to beat him in a boxing match. At this point, he's got some years under his belt. He's got what, 4 knockouts. I mean,
Sparring with
certain it
Jean
could be done.
Pascal, you know,
Yeah,
he's taken a legitimate approach to boxing, and we have to give him that
yeah.
credit. You know,
It, it,
trains with great trainers. As far as him being good for boxing, you know, he's done, you know, youth boxing events in Puerto Rico. Jay Leon Love is one of his trainers. So Jay Leon Love also fought on this event. So he's, you know, giving more opportunities to people in the boxing community just by putting on
Mhm.
these events. So he's good for boxing. I got to give him that respect. It's just, you know, how far can he go in the sport of boxing is something that's yet to be seen. And we got to keep in mind this is only his 5th fight.
Mhm.
So he's very fresh. You know, if this was anybody else, their fight wouldn't even be televised. But because he is who he is and he's putting on these events, he is the main event. And I got to give him his credit at this point. At least he's provided entertainment for millions of fans at this point. Whether, you know, he's providing a lot of entertainment for hardcore boxing fans, that's debatable, but
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, we clown him a lot because we've never seen anybody doing these kind of numbers with his particular skill set and what he brings to the ring. But at the same time, like you said, this is only his 5th fight. He's been boxing, 3 years or so. It's
Yeah.
about where you would expect the level you would expect somebody with his experience to be fighting on if you look at his competition and what he brings to the ring. So I'm not mad at him. I'll make fun of him. You know, he says the craziest and does the craziest stuff. So, and he's not impervious to judgment or anything like that. So
Absolutely not.
I'll go in on him, but there's no actual hate or envy or nothing like that. If it makes dollars, it makes sense. So get your money.
Yeah.
You just couldn't
Well,
mess with me though. Nah.
you heard it, Jake
Hey,
Paul. You don't want it with Breezy, and Breezy just got off back surgery. And I'll go ahead and say it right now. Jake Paul can't mess with Breezy. Period. Period. Let's go ahead and wrap this show. Adonis, closing remarks, final thoughts.
Man,
The floor is yours.
I gotta defend my man. You know, Woodley, my man. We from the same area. He's from
Yeah.
his alma mater's my current school, so I gotta hold it down for a brother like that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep it consistent here.
And you know, Adonis, he's also in the Hall of Fame at your college, right? For wrestling.
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
that,
he was
so
yeah.
we definitely have to give Woodley his props.
I just want to say I'm gonna keep consistent here. We cannot. We're gonna clown on Tyron Woodley a little bit in these slides, but overall, he went into a sport when he was already past his physical prime, and you know he didn't win. He didn't win both times, but he tried. He did his best. Um, and if you have the courage to even do that, I mean, again, I'll bring it up. We all gave Clarissa Shields so much props for even being willing to step out of a sport in her physical prime and go over to another sport. And sure, she lost to somebody, a 2-0 MMA fighter, and Tyron Woodley lost to a 5-0 boxer. It happens. That's why these sports are different. So I do want to say, well, we didn't rag on how bad Clarissa Shields was. We gave props to her opponent. I don't want to rag on how bad Tyron Woodley was in this fight. I want to give props to Jake Paul.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I don't want to rag on him either. And you know, I think that it does, you know, it is commendable that he did step in there, especially he stepped in there on short notice. And coincidentally, because of that, Jake Paul gave him a Rolex for his troubles of taking this fight on late notice. So we have to give him his props for that. But at the end of the day, I would just love to not see these guys. You know, this is embarrassing at you know, to a certain degree. And I would just, as a fellow, you know, combatant, I guess you should say, I just, I would love to not see them go through this trouble, to be honest with you. Breezy, final thoughts.
yeah, I'm with you there. I don't know how how the UFC is gonna handle the Jake Paul problem, and I said this before. I don't think he's gonna last that long in boxing, but he's already lasted longer than I thought he would last. So, there's that. But I still think the moment he faced somebody with more experience than him, that's what will bring on his expiration date in boxing, at least. But it's entertainment.
Yeah.
and be entertained. And like I said, the science works, and it's very consistent. He has more experience than anybody he's faced, and anybody with more experience than him has a much greater chance of beating him.
Yeah. In that regard, I'd love to see the fight with Jake Paul and Tommy Fury. They've had words. They were supposed to fight. Tommy Fury dropped out with a rib injury. And now Jake Paul is saying that Tommy had his chance. I would like to see Jake Paul versus Tommy Fury if I can't, get those selfish demands of seeing him face Kendall Gill or one of the Nigerian brothers from the Jussie Smollett case. Because it would be nice to see somebody from Chicago on that stage and getting that opportunity. But if we can't get that, I would love to see Tommy Fury hop in there with Jake Paul. And, we would, at that point, we would really see what Jake Paul has. And we'd also see what Tommy Fury has, because Tommy Fury is a young prospect as well. Final remark from me is, UFC fans, this was not staged. This was not rigged. And if you want to rig this, it's real easy. You just roll the punch instead of just taking the full force of the punch. You just roll it and then you just don't get up. But that's not what happened here. You could see from the explosion of sweat, spit, maybe a little blood and Vaseline and everything that flew up into the air the moment Jake Paul connected with that overhand right. There's nothing rigged about this. Tyron Woodley did not need to, and I'm sure he did not want to take that big of a punch from somebody with, significantly less fighting experience than him. Not rigged. This is something you guys are going to have to live with. I know that you guys want to say it's rigged just to, explain it to yourselves a little better. Not on my watch. This is the hard-hitting truth. I'm HB alongside my brother Breezy. We have to thank Adonis for joining us tonight. And also thank you to Jason from Podcast or Die Trying. You may not see him, but he's producing this episode from behind the scenes. Thank you very much. For any and all inquiries, you can reach out to us at thht.boxing@gmail.com. Until next time, protect yourself at all times and roll with the punches. Breezy, what happened to peace?
Peace. There it is.
There it is.